Good day to you ladies and gents, this is Joshua, or the Game Nerd, bringing you a champion package for the just revealed support Rell, the Iron Maiden. This won't be an opinion or review based video, we're going to be going over everything at face value. We'll be starting with her abilities, then moving on to her bio, and finally finishing off with the champion insights. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to hit the like, and if you'd like to see more content in the future, hit that subscribe button. Without further ado, let's move right on to her spells. Alright, let's start things off with Rell's passive, Break the Mold. Rell attacks very slowly, but temporarily steals a portion of her target's armor and magic resist to deal bonus damage based on the amount stolen. Additionally, Rell can siphon resist from multiple different foes to grow extremely tanky. Basically, when she autos, she steals resist, similar to one of the effects of Trundle's ultimate, and these resists stack per champion attacked, meaning she can get super tanky if allowed to keep attacking. Moving on, we have her Q, Shattering Strike. Rell stabs forward with her lance, breaking any shields and damaging all enemies hit, but the damage decreases after the first target. If Rell has an ally bound with her E, Attract and Repel, we'll get to that later. She and her ally recover health for each champion hit by this ability. Pretty straightforward. She stabs everything in a line, breaking shields and doing damage, reduce after first target, and does healing if she's bound. Next up, we have her W, which has two parts depending on her form. Ferromancy Crash Down and Mount Up, or W1 and 2. Starting with Crash Down, while mounted, Rell leaps and transforms her mount into heavy armor, gaining a huge shield that lasts until destroyed or remounting. On landing, she knocks up enemies around her. Rell can cast her E and R during the change. Again, fairly straightforward. She turns into a tank, knocking up enemies around her on cast. Keep in mind the note, she can still cast her E and her R during the transformation. After crashing down, you've got Mount Up. While armored, Rell rushes forward and transforms her armor into a mount, gaining a burst of movement speed. During her next attack, she charges her target to deal bonus damage and flip them over her shoulder. So, for the second part, Rell jumps back onto her iron horse thing, giving her move speed and prepping her for a CC auto attack. These abilities kind of remind me of Urgot, but definitely have a nice metallic flair. Now, onto the previously mentioned E, Attract and Repel. This one gives me serious pre-rework Mordekaiser vibes. Rell magnetically binds a piece of her armor to a target allied champion, granting them bonus armor and magic resist while nearby. Rell can recast this ability to break the bind and stun all enemies around and between her and her bound ally. Look at those visuals. You could compare this to a lot of abilities, but the effects are pretty straightforward. I wonder if there's a max range for the bind to still be effective. Anyways, moving on to her final ability, her ultimate, Magnet Storm. Skarner, step aside. Rell erupts in a magnetic fury, yanking nearby enemies towards her. She then creates a gravitational field around her, pulling nearby enemies in for a few seconds. The field doesn't interrupt her enemies' other actions. It looks like an Orianna and Skarner ultimate combined into an epic magnetic storm. Keep in mind that it doesn't interrupt her enemies' actions. I wonder what some of the interactions might look like. That's all for her abilities, and wow, I'm pretty excited to try her out in patch 10.25. But we aren't quite done yet. Next up, we have our bio, straight from Riot Universe. Let's start off with the description, and then we'll move on to the full bio. The product of a brutal experimentation at the hands of the Black Rose, Rell is a defiant, living weapon determined to topple Noxus. Her childhood was one of misery and horror, enduring unspeakable procedures to perfect and weaponize her magical control over metal, until she made a violent escape, killing many of her captors in the process. Now, branded as a criminal, Rell attacks Noxian soldiers on sight as she searches for survivors of her old academy, defending the meek while delivering merciless death to her former instructors. Wow, that's dark. Let's get even more detail from her full bio. Posters across Noxus warn of a dangerous criminal armed with a massive, blunted spear and born atop a magical fiend whose mere existence poses a threat to the safety and security of the entire nation. Even some within the steeled ranks of the Trifarian Legion have begun to worry that they will be sent after her to their ultimate, almost certain deaths. What kind of monster could be behind such heinous, unchecked destruction? The simple answer is a 16-year-old girl. The complicated one is unforgivable. Rell was special from the moment of her birth, and fated to suffer for it. Born the daughter of a Noxian foot soldier and the heir to a fallen noble house, she enjoyed neither the trappings of wealth nor the gilded upbringing common to children of the lower aristocracy. Nevertheless, her parents had grand plans to mold her into someone who could shatter through Noxus's dense political landscape. As Rell's mother always said, excellence is measured in sacrifice. Rell's unhappiness grew with time, sparking something unique within her, a magic unlike anything seen in centuries, the ability to manipulate metal. To Rell's parents, this was something to be exploited, for Rell's own sake, of course, and they tried unsuccessfully to apprentice her with many powerful mages who might whisk their daughter into the political or military elite. But someone else took notice of the young girl's magic, seeing in Rell a weapon who could one day face Noxus's most hated, ancient foe. A certain pale woman visited the family with a dark bargain. Rell soon found herself the star pupil of a very special academy, hidden far from the capital and away from the council's prying eyes. And though they rarely made appearances in her new boarding school, her mother and father never seemed more proud or more hopeful of their daughter's future. It seemed, at least for a moment, that perhaps Rell would be loved after all. Then, the true horrors began. Rell was first forced into combat with another student when she was 8, and, afterward, a kind of magic sigil was painfully grafted into her arm, amplifying her powers so that she could become even stronger. Yet, while this had been framed as a training exercise, Rell never saw the boy again. She never saw any of her opponents again. Every day, she grew more powerful, honing her magic for martial combat. Her body became covered with sigils that amplified her magical abilities to impossible heights. In time, she could rip a vein of raw ore from deep out of the ground, twist the walls into deadly weapons, and superheat an opponent's armor until it collapsed and crushed them. But her instructors desired even more from her, all in the hopes that Rell would be the most powerful soldier the Empire had ever known. On her 16th birthday, after a particularly barbaric duel, she'd finally had enough. Casting her instructors aside, Rell tore past the guards and ripped open the doors of a forbidden wing of the academy, discovering the true nature of her school. Every opponent she defeated had been nullified, their magic forcibly extracted from them and placed into the very sigils covering Rell's body, and left as emotionless puppets, devoid of memories. This was the price of her power, and she could never give it back. Worst of all was the headmistress, who oversaw the procedures herself, Rell's own mother. All of this had been for Rell, she said. After all, excellence is measured in sacrifice. Rell raged. To the small handful of faculty who survived her escape from the academy, it was like the earth had been torn open into a twisting whirlwind of razor-sharp slag. The building ripped itself apart, forming an impenetrable suit of black armor around Rell, as she crushed those who stood before her, flattening seasoned soldiers with a lance heavier than a mountain. Bursting through the front gate on a steed made of rippling iron, she led as many of her classmates as she could to freedom, leaving the rows scrambling to recover the knoll and erase any trace of what their organization had done. But it was far too late. Soon enough, the surviving faculty members began to die in increasingly public ways, and the knoll could no longer be kept secret. Rell is now a threat to Noxus, but not in the way the handbills proclaim. She is a self-styled defender of the meek, full of unchecked fury, distrustful of everyone, and merciless toward a government that turned a blind eye to years of suffering and abuse. Not because the Empire was personally responsible, but because they stood by and did nothing. Riding atop her iron steed, Rell's eyes are set on nothing less than the complete destruction of Noxus, and saving any children who, like her, survived the Black Rose Academy. And there is nothing in this world that can stop her. Well, talk about going from dark to even darker. That was pretty serious. And honestly, I can't wait for a full short story to come out. Finally, let's look into the champion insights for Rell, brought to us by Riot Kashmir. Noxus has a problem. No, it's not just Demacia's penchant for spinning nationalists, the creeping threat of the Black Mist, or the ever-increasing number of demons in Runeterra. The problem is closer to home, and it's metal AF. Mordekaiser is inevitable, and Noxus must stop at nothing to defeat him. But what does that look like? Are they willing to throw aside all morals to construct their ultimate weapon? Or what happens when it turns against them? Rell happens, and Noxus is not prepared. When the dev team first started working on Rell, they had two things to go off of: dark support and tank. is not quite enough to make a character, so they did what anyone would do. Turn to the artist. We really love the idea of creating a tanky support. It had been a long time since we'd made one. Brom was actually the last, says senior concept artist Justin Riot Albers. But unlike Brom, we wanted her to have a darker past and personality. I explored a few different options, but everyone was really attached to the metal bending concept. After we landed on that, we just had to decide where Rell came from. When darkness, strength, and armor are involved, there's one area of Runeterra that just really works. Noxus. It's a land of inclusivity, tolerance, and opportunity. At least to those willing to put aside ethics for a chance at power. The Black Rose, who run Noxus's clandestine operations, are interested in some horrible things to further the Empire's expansion and power, explains narrative lead Jared Carnival Knights Rosen. Demon calling, void magic, resurrecting, and controlling dead gods. A little of this, a little of that. And one of the things this group of crappy 1,000-year-old aristocrats have discovered is sigil magic, which has the ability to rip the magic out of living things and then forcibly put it into someone else. So when the team was looking for a way to explain Rell's dark past, they focused on that dark side of Noxus. Born to an agent of the Black Rose and a ranking Noxian soldier, Rell's magic manifested at an early age, in the incredibly rare form of ferromancy, or metal manipulation, perfect for combating Mordekaiser, a revenant attached to metal. I mean, seems legit. So her parents did what any truly patriotic Noxian would. They sent her to an academy for magical kids to be turned into a weapon of Noxus. Yay, Noxian parents. Rell spent years at this facility, forced to fight the other students under the guise of learning from one another to improve, and she defeated every single one. But as she bested the other students and grew increasingly powerful, they began to disappear, torn from her life just as the instructors tore the magic from their bodies and implanted it into Rell, their ultimate weapon. The magic from the other kids is placed into Rell with sigil magic, which empowers her own latent powers, explains Riot. But the process is incredibly painful for both Rell and the other students. I focused a lot on adding the sigils to her arms, especially the one that holds her lance, to make sure it's clear when playing her. I wanted the pain that she underwent to be clear to players, so they understood her past. When Rell defeats other students, they either die from their wounds or the staff tears the magic from their bodies to implant into Rell, and that process leaves them null, in a zombie-like state, devoid of magic and emotion. But Rell never signed up for this. She doesn't want to fight her friends, the only ones who ever showed her compassion and love. And once Rell finds out she's been lied to and forced into harming others, she's furious at everyone and everything, and she tears the entire place down. Anger is such a hard emotion to empathize with, and we wanted to make sure players could understand where Rell was coming from. All the pain she's gone through, the heartbreak, says narrative editor Elan Kulani Stimmel, is one of the reasons we decided to make Rell young. It's much easier to understand and relate to a young person's fury. Most teenagers are filled with angst, and that's without discovering their life has been fueled by lies. This is where we meet Rell. She's free from the facility. Black Rose got what they wanted. Noxus's greatest weapon is finally unleashed. But I think it's unleashed on the wrong people. I think Noxus messed up. I wanted to make Rell the tankiest tank the world has ever seen. I had this idea of a heavily armored character who sunders the ground she walks on, making the earth beneath her collapse from her might, says game designer Riot Statue Cheluk. Unfortunately, that's hard to display in League, and I still needed to make sure she thematically felt like she was manipulating metal. I was looking for neat ways to map her ferromantic powers into her gameplay, to really make her feel powerful and hard-hitting, without feeling like a mage. That meant the team needed to understand what exactly ferromancy is. How does it work? What does it look like in League? How do they make sure Rell feels like a tank, not a metal-slinging mage? How do they make sure Rell isn't Toph? I wanted to make sure that Rell visually reads as a tank, said Riot. When I was designing her armor, which is made from metal from the school, I wanted to make sure it read that she's incredibly strong and powerful. The metal part of her armor is bulky and dark, so to balance this, I gave it a dress-like silhouette. Rell crafted her armor using ferromancy. It acts as a sort of magnetic field that allows her to control latent metal in the ground, metal that touches her directly, or any that comes close to her. What she can't do is reach hundreds of meters across the battlefield to pick up a single person and crush their armor. Because Rell needs to be close to her enemies to manipulate their armor, and she plays as a tank, I needed to make sure that her gameplay fit that, Riot Statue explains. Her ultimate became the best way to illustrate that particularly tank fantasy. She becomes supercharged with power, and enemies in her vicinity get pulled in, but it doesn't interrupt their casts or channels. But that still doesn't explain what Ferromancy looks like in League. How do you make something invisible clear in a game that requires clarity? Imagine the nightmare if her magnetism was invisible and they went with that. Jesus. When I started on Rell, I didn't really have any idea how to give Ferromancy clear effects. It's funny, I actually started by looking at magnets, shares VFX artist Kyle Riot Prisma Prime Valentine. I don't really understand how they work, but I know that the way they pull is incredibly strong, and it's often portrayed as distortion in the electron molecules in the air. After some tinkering with different effects and forms of light manipulation, Riot Prisma Prime landed on something he felt was uniquely Rell: chromatic aberration. By focusing on color distortion, Riot Prisma Prime made it appear as if light bent differently around Rell when she cast her abilities, and by adding her highlight colors of red and yellow, it added a more earthy, ragey element that demonstrated her personality. While Ferromancy isn't a new concept in fantasy or sci-fi, tell us about it, it's new to Runeterra, and needed to be audibly different from other forms of magic, explains the sound designer Darren Riot Dumerwitz, Lodwick. And it should be distinguishable from other metal-wielding champions like Mordekaiser and Leona. So I used a bunch of different methods and sources, like grinding metal, dry ice, and a lot of processing to make the metal sound fluid. One of our other goals with Rell was to hit on the armored and mounted knight thematic, says Riot Statue. And because I wanted her to be so tanky, I needed to figure out how it would work with her gameplay. We wanted her to be this unstoppable, slow-moving tank, but that kind of feels bad in League because the game relies heavily on movement, positioning, and dodging. But I couldn't stop thinking of that idea, and I needed to find a way to make it palatable. Because Rell has the ability to manipulate metal to her will, she clearly wouldn't spend all day walking around lugging heavy armor everywhere, right? She needs something that freed her up to move faster. Finding the right mount for Rell ended up taking more work than the team expected. It couldn't be too cute because because it's Rell. She's on a mission to hunt down the faculty at the academy and slay them where they stand. She's not going to ride a rainbow unicorn to do that. But anything that was too otherworldly wouldn't give the clear mounted knight read. I explored a few options for the appearance of Rell's mount, shares Riot Erp. I tried a lot early on, like abstract metal figures or a basilisk, but none of them worked because they were visually confusing. So I decided to stick to a horse, but make it more metal and hollow. This way it's clear this isn't the type of horse you'd feed carrots to. Rell's form swapping let the team explore two very unique gameplay fantasies: the tankiest tank and the mounted knight. Because you can swap between these two forms, on a cooldown of course, they were free to lean hard into each. When Rell dives the backline and dismounts, she moves incredibly slow but has more armor and magic resist. She's looking for the fight, and she won't run from it. When Rell makes the decision to enter the fight and dismounts, she's stuck in that form for a while, Riot Statue shares. The upside is that we made her really tanky so she can survive for a bit, but she's not unkillable. She actually got the nickname the Int Horse during playtest. She can get to any fight on her horse, but she's fully committed to it once she dismounts. But that's okay. Players will figure it out, and once they do, it'll feel amazing. So that means you'll have two horses diving your backline. I can imagine what the Rell Hecarim comps will look like. But there was a small hiccup in the mounting fantasy the team wanted to hit. It was hard to animate. Like, really hard. Making Rell's mounting animation feel good was really challenging. The horse is the avatar of her rage and magnetic powers, and I wanted it to be this cinematic movement for players so it would match the fantasy of her riding into battle, to senior animator Dave Helsby. Each individual piece of her armor needed to be animated, and it needed to be visually clear while still delivering on that exciting moment. I spent a lot of time visually lining up each piece of metal from the horse to her biped armored form. So I guess it kind of has that Transformers look where every piece goes somewhere. There's another reason for wanting Rell to embody the mounted knight thematic. Remember the Knoll children for the academy? Well, she certainly does. At the end of the day, it can be easy to look at Rell and think that she's just angry, full of hate, or out for revenge. While I'm not saying that's not true, Her ultimate goal is much softer than that, says Carnival Knights. She commiserates with these kids more than she can with anyone else. And she'll stop at nothing to save them. In many ways, she's a gallant knight. She wants to defend those who can't, starting with the other kids. Rell could have been different if anything in her life had changed, or if her parents hadn't handed her over to the Black Rose, if she hadn't discovered the truth of the school, or if she'd been shown a sliver of love. But that's not what happened. And while Rell won't dwell on the past, that doesn't mean she can't find a little joy in the life she has now. The first thing I thought of when I heard Rell was a teenager and had a mount was a coin-operated horse ride, like the ones outside of grocery stores, recalls Dave Helsby. I've seen teenagers ride them a lot, and it's so interesting because you see a person on the cusp of being an adult, but there's still a bit of kid in them. I just feel like that made sense for Rell. She has a lot of adult responsibilities on her shoulders, but she's still a kid, and she deserves a little fun. Alright, and that's gonna wrap up this video. So what do you guys think of Rell, the new tank support champion in League of Legends? Are you excited that they're finally adding more elements from Avatar: The Last Airbender into League of Legends? You can let me know down in the comments, and again, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, and if you want to see more in the future, hit that subscribe button. Until then, I'm Joshua, or the Game Nerd, signing out.